Hey there, how's it going? I'm Anyssa, and today we're doing another episode of the podcast, but we're doing a part 2, so if you didn't see last episode, you probably should see it. I mean, technically, it's a little bit of a different story, but they kind of go together. But yeah, we have Tegan, who's been here, and also joined by my good friend Christian as well. So last time he told us of Ruby Ridges.
Yep, yeah. Ruby Ridge.
Ruby Ridge. And so yeah, hear that. And then now you can go ahead and tell us what we're talking about today.
Today we're going to be talking about the Waco siege, which happened about a year after Ruby Ridge. And it happened in Waco, Texas. And it...
Oh, okay. Yeehaw, partner.
Love that.
Yeah,
they like that. They like my yeehaw.
They were saying yeehaw as well.
Partner.
We heard like a little crack in the building.
This was a standoff between the federal government as well as Texas state law enforcement against a religious cult known as the Branch Davidians. So, in brief, like a brief summary, this was a siege, a 51-day siege, like 51 or almost 53-day siege at the Branch Davidians compound, Mount Carmel in Waco, Texas. The ATF, they launched a surprise raid on this compound to serve an arrest warrant on the leader of the Branch Davidians, David Koresh. And around the end of the siege, as the federal officials were growing ever more impatient as to things just not moving fast enough, decided to launch like a final raid on the compound to just end the siege. They launched a tear gas attack on the Branch Davidians to try to force them out of the compound. A fire sparked, and the tear gas that was in the building caused the entire building to ignite.
Shit.
The entire compound burnt down, and most of the Branch Davidians died, as well as David Koresh. They died in the fire.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that's the story I'm going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
So, some quick...
Buckle up.
Let's say some quick context on the Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians are a religious group. They're based off the Seventh-day Adventists, which is another kind of sort of like sect in Christianity. It's just like another form. So the guy who founded it was a gentleman named Benjamin Roden, and he established the Branch Davidians, whereas the another group is the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, was established by another gentleman named Victor Hotef in 1935. And they have been described as a doomsday cult. So,
Heck yeah, brother.
Fun.
So, Victor Hotef, who was an Adventist, wrote a series of tracts titled Shepherd's Rod, which called for reform within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So his ideas were rejected, so Victor Hotef and his followers formed a group known as the Davidians, who moved to Waco, Texas. They built a community in the Mount Carmel Center, which they used as their headquarters. So after his death in 1955, his wife Florence took control of the Davidians organization. And later in that same year, Benjamin Roden, who was a follower of Hotef, proclaimed what he believed to be a new message from God, and then he wrote letters presenting it to the Davidians. So he signed each of these letters the Branch. That's what he signed them as, believing that to be the new name that Jesus had taken to reflect a stage of the work in the heavenly sanctuary, as they called it. And those who accepted Benjamin Roden's teachings became known as the Branch Davidians Seventh-day Adventists. So that's where the Branch Davidians name comes from. Mm-hmm. Florence Hotef, she sold the Mount Carmel Center and then purchased another patch of property near Elk, Texas, which is close to Waco, naming it the new Mount Carmel Center. Mm-hmm. And she began having visions of what she thought was a prophecy of the apocalypse, the end of the world. And this was around April 22nd of 1959, when that day neared and the world didn't end. She decided to dissolve the Davidian Association and sold all but 76 acres of the new Mount Carmel property. Then Benjamin Roden took possession of it in 1962 and then began to purchase the remaining acres from Florence. And then in February, the new Mount Carmel was then sold to Benjamin and his wife Lois and their son George. So then from then on, the property was just simply known as Mount Carmel. That was it. And then as Benjamin died, Lois, his wife, became the next Davidian prophet at the compound. So in 1981, a young man named Vernon Howell, who then later changed his name to David Koresh, came to Mount Carmel to study biblical prophecy under Lois. But by 1983, Howell, David, had gained a group of followers that then separated from Lois's organization to form the Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Association. A lot of branches here.
Yeah.
So make a whole tree out of this.
Right. So as he has his followers, Lois continued to operate her Branch Davidian group, and she did this at Mount Carmel, while David's group and the Branch Davidians, Lois groups, they were two separate organizations with different leaders, names, locations. It wasn't until 1987, after Lois had died, that David filed a document claiming to be the president of the Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. So Koresh and his followers went to Mount Carmel, and they engaged in a shootout with George Roden, that eventually resulted in Koresh's group occupying the land. And Koresh's leadership ended at the Waco siege after the 51-day standoff with the federal agents.
51?
Yeah.
Yep, 51 days.
Holy wow.
It's crazy.
So how he took over the group and what resulted after is pretty interesting. So David in 1983 began claiming that he had the gift of prophecy, that he could see coming events. But David Thibodeau, who was a Branch Davidian, who lived at the Mount Carmel compound as under David's leadership, in his book, A Place Called Waco, he speculated that he might have had a sexual relationship with Lois Roden when he was a young gentleman and she was quite older.
Wow.
Perhaps.
She was in her late 60s, and I think he was like in his early 20s.
Get it, girl. Sorry.
And David, he began to claim that God had chosen him to father a child with Lois, who would then be considered the chosen one, quote unquote. So Lois allowed David to begin using his own teaching, his own point of view, his own beliefs, his own teachings, his own messages, which caused a controversy with the group and her son George, who was intended to be the group's next leader. He didn't like David. So that's how this whole started. With that, but then as Lois died, and then David was going to be the leader, he was forced out by George, and in an attempt to see who the rightful leader of the group should be, George exhumed a body from one of the previous members that had died, that they had buried there, and he challenged David on a competition to see who could raise the dead. Because whoever could raise the dead would be the leader of the Branch Davidians.
Very logical.
I mean, someone raised the dead in front of me, I'd be like, yeah, I will listen to anything you say.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Understandable.
Yeah. So David went to the authorities and filed a charge against George for illegally exhuming a corpse.
Get him.
Awesome.
Oh, that's funny.
But he was told he had to show proof, like
Be like,
a photo.
do you want me to bring the body in?
Yeah. So David seized the opportunity to seek the criminal prosecution of George by returning to the compound with 7 armed followers, and he allegedly attempted to get photographic proof of the exhumation. But then when David's group was discovered by George, a gunfight ensued. And then when the sheriff had arrived, George had already suffered a minor gunshot wound and was pinned down behind a tree. And as a result of the incident, David and his followers were charged with attempted murder. And at the trial, David explained that he went to the center to uncover evidence of the criminal disturbance of a corpse by George. David's followers were acquitted. And in the case of David himself, his mistrial was declared on him. So nothing happened with him.
Oh, okay. It's like battle of the cult leaders.
Yeah. But after all the cases were dismissed and they were all dropped, David invited members of the prosecution over back to the compound for ice cream, just as like a celebration, like he wasn't going to prison.
Heck yeah.
But then later, George murdered one of his followers with an axe blow to the skull after that other follower stated his belief that he himself was the true Messiah.
Right.
So, and George thought that the man was sent by David to kill him. Which wasn't true.
Sounds like a whole lot of hoopla going on.
So he was declared insane, and then he was sent to a mental health facility. So that's that. But also, I have to mention that David was alleged, after all this had gone on and he began to lead the Branch Davidians, he was alleged to have been involved in multiple incidents of physical and sexual abuse towards children.
Oh.
So.
Not good, David. Not good.
So, and he had a doctrine of the House of David, is what it was called. His doctrine of the House of David, it led to marriages, quote unquote, with both the already married women and also single women in his Branch Davidian compound. Let's see. In 1992, there was a 6-month-long investigation of the allegations of abuse by Texas CPS, which failed to turn up any evidence because, and this is possibly because, the Davidians concealed the spiritual marriage of David to another follower's younger sister when she was 12 years old.
Yikes.
And they attempted to hide this by assigning her to a surrogate husband who was David Thibodeau, the author of the book, who was around 10 years younger than David at the time. And that was just for the sake of keeping up appearances. And regarding the allegations of the physical abuse, it's claimed that no evidence was ever found.
Okay.
Yeah, but it says there's a widely reported incident where ex-members claim that David became irritated with the cries of one of his sons, and he spanked the child for several minutes. Yeah, and then there's a second report where a man involved in the custody battle visited the center and claimed to have seen the beating of a young boy with a stick.
Yeah, because it'd be hard to find evidence against that. Because when you're in that cult mentality, they can do no wrong. So it's is there anything not unjust physical abuse happening? It's no,
because to them that's right.
That's
or
right.
That's
it's
normal.
What it needs to happen, or it's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or they're even I deserved it because I did whatever. So it's just the natural punishment.
Right. Yeah, so the allegations of the abuse, they mostly came from just detractors of the cult and ex-members of the cult. And in 93, the Justice Department, they also cited the allegations, but other legal scholars pointed out that the ATF, because they were mostly involved in this investigation, the ATF had no jurisdiction when it comes to like abuse, like child abuse, because they're only involved in alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That's literally in their name. So, they, like the accounts, like these allegations appeared to have just been inserted by the ATF to just make the case against David, like just to blow out the case, like to give justification to go after him. But yeah, it's stated that he had fathered more than 12 children by several wives, and wives is in quotes. I put that in quotes. But yeah, like during the siege, like people were saying like children were being abused as they were refusing to come out from their compound. They were saying like, oh, we have to move in because like children are being abused and all that.
Right. Right.
So there's a little background on the religious cult, on the cult leader.
Man, this is already so crazy. I'm like, I mean, cults are so fascinating.
They really are. It's just the type of mentality you can get into where, like, again, like your leader is like, you believe everything they say, they can do no wrong. And like when people like, because like, you know, there's like the whole dynamic between like your family who's like the outsider technically.
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you doing? And you're like, what are you talking about? And then that further convinces like them to cut off their family because my family doesn't support me. My family doesn't understand me.
Yeah.
My cult leader or whatever, you know, whoever, Jim, Bob, David, he does. He understands.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always crazy because, yeah, you're always like, oh, well, I would never fall for that. Like, there's no way I would be victim to that. And it's like, no, like, it's a slow, but, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so in getting through like the beginning of what like the events leading up to the siege, the Waco Tribune Herald began publishing what was called the Sinful Messiah, which was a series of articles who reported allegations that Koresh had physically abused children in the compound and also committed statutory rape by taking underage brides, multiple underage brides. And David also was an advocate for polygamy, obviously, because he had multiple wives.
Right, yeah.
And the paper had claimed that David announced that he was entitled to at least 140 wives,
Jesus.
and that he was entitled to claim any of the women in his group as his, and that he had at least fathered a dozen children, and some of the mothers became brides as young as 12 or 13 years old.
Oh my God,
Jesus
that is
Christ.
awful. Yeah.
And in addition to the allegations of sexual abuse and misconduct, David and his followers were also suspected of stockpiling illegal weapons. Mm-hmm. So that's where most of the ATF investigation comes into play, is stockpiling of weapons.
It's like, weapons, we can do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, after receiving the reports of illegal weapons being stockpiled, the ATF opened up a formal investigation, and they classified it as sensitive, quote, thereby calling for a high degree of oversight from both Houston and from ATF headquarters. The ATF had become concerned over reports of automatic gunfire coming from the Mount Carmel compound, because they were just out just shooting their guns.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about shooting the shit.
Yeah. In July, ATF agents David Aguilera and Skinner visited the Branch Davidians' gun dealer, Henry McCannon, who tried to get them to talk with David on the phone. David offered to let the ATF inspect the weapons and the paperwork, and he even asked to speak with Aguilera, but Aguilera declined. Mm. He was willing to let them into the compound to see that everything was above the board, that nothing was wrong, but the agent declined.
That's weird.
So then the sheriff had told reporters regarding the law enforcement talking with David to just go out and talk to him. What's wrong with notifying them? So the ATF, they began surveillance on the house across the road from a compound several months before the siege started. And their cover was kind of poor. They posed as new college students.
Dude.
Even though they were in their 30s with new cars.
Oh, no.
They were not registered at any of the local schools and did not keep a schedule that would fit any legitimate employment or classes.
Right.
So.
Right.
The investigation included sending an undercover agent by the name of Robert Rodriguez, who David had learned he was an undercover agent, though he chose not to reveal that information until the day of the siege or the raid.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the ATF used an affidavit that was filed by Aguilera to obtain a search and arrest warrant, which eventually led up to the siege. So the investigation began when a postal worker informed the sheriff that he had believed he had been delivering explosives to the ammo and gun store that was operated by the Branch Davidians out of their compound. Mm-hmm. This store was called the Mag Bag.
Solid name.
Mm-hmm. And it had been identified by the said postal worker as suspicious in deliveries. Because if I think I remember correctly, there should be... here, yep, I listed it here. It was the sheriff was notified in May and June of that year of 2 cases of inert grenades. So just like the shells. So basically, essentially like what could be considered a prop grenade. It was just the shell, no active components. So inert grenades, black gunpowder, 90 pounds of powdered aluminum, and 30 to 40 cardboard tubes. So you could, like, those are parts you could make an untaxed explosive.
Yeah.
When upon discovery of these the parts that were being delivered to the compound in the mail, Aguilera, he had also noted that the store, the Mag Bag, had purchased several AR-15 / M16 part kits. And some sellers of these kits were already under investigation by the ATF, and that they had also seized illegal weapons from previous customers that they had sold these kits to. Mm-hmm. And he stated that I have been involved in many cases where defendants, following a relatively simple process, convert an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle to a fully automatic rifle of the nature of the M16 to justify the ATF's involvement in the case. Mm-hmm. Later on, a local farmer and his wife reported to the sheriff that he could hear what sounded like machine gun fire, and he stated that it was likely a .50 caliber machine gun or multiple M16s. And the farmer claimed he was very familiar with machine guns, having done tours overseas in the Army.
Okay, I was thinking about that. I was like, how does I know what that sounds like? But okay, maybe I just don't know.
The affidavit closed with Aguilera verifying the store via interviews made with associated parties and gun shops from which the Mag Bag purchased these items from. And among these items were over 45 AR-15 upper receivers and 5 M16 upper receivers. And he stated that these kits contain all the parts of an M16 except for the lower receiver unit, which is the firearm by lawful definition. So, like, the main receiver of your gun is technically, under legal definition, the actual firearm.
Right, okay.
And that's the part that they didn't have. They only had, like, the upper parts. Yeah, and he said that he admitted that neither the noise complaints nor the items that were being ordered were necessarily illegal.
Yep.
So, but the Mag Bag, that is, because they would manufacture the guns, and they would also press their own ammunition. So that's where the black gunpowder comes into play, because they would press their own ammunition. But they would take these guns and ammo to gun shows, and that's how they supported themselves. So they would sell these guns and ammunition at gun shows.
Right.
So
welcome to the gun show. I think about that every time I see a sign.
So, using Aguilera's affidavit, they alleged that the Davidians had violated the federal law and the ATF obtained search and arrest warrants for David and specific followers on weapons charges. That's what they were using to justify going in and launching a raid on the compound, was weapons violations. And also citing the many firearms that they had also accumulated. The ATF made a claim that David was also possibly operating a meth lab at the compound to establish a drug nexus and obtain military assets under the war on drugs. But again, also, the ATF didn't have jurisdiction in this area either. That would be a DEA problem.
Right.
But they requested assistance from the DEA and the Department of Defense, citing a drug connection based on the recent delivery of chemicals, instruments, and glassware to the compound, and a written testimony from a former resident of the compound alleging that Howell had told him that the drug trafficking was a desirable way to raise money, and several current residents who had prior drug involvement, as well as 2 former residents who were incarcerated for drug trafficking crimes. National Guard overflights, thermal images showed hotspot inside the compound, possibly indicating there was a meth lab on premises. But there was a meth lab on the site, but David, when he took over that compound, had called the police to come in and clean up the site. So there actually was no active meth lab being ran on the compound. There was one previously, but it had already been removed. They planned to launch their raid on Monday, March 1st in 1993, but then they claimed that the raid was then moved up a day to February 28th in response to the Waco Tribune's Sinful Messiah articles that were being posted. They preferred to arrest David when he was outside of Mount Carmel, but planners received inaccurate information that he rarely ever left the building. So, but the cult itself was known locally, and they had great relations with the local population. Because it says, the Branch Davidians partly supported themselves by trading at gun shows. And took care of the relevant paperwork to ensure that their transactions were legal. Everything was good.
Right.
Paul Feta, who was a member of the Branch Davidians, he had his FFL, which is a federal firearms license. That's how you can sell your guns legally. So he was a licensed firearms dealer. And he used their gun business, the mag bag. That is how he sold his guns and ammunition. So whenever shipments for the mag bag arrived to the compound, they were signed for by either Feta, David himself, or Steve Schneider, which is another associate of David. So, and the morning of the raid, Paul and his son were on their way to an Austin gun show to conduct business for their firearms business. So when people cite the stockpiling of weapons at the compound, you could look at that as an inventory for their gun show or for their gun shop.
It's for their business, right?
So, February 28th, the ATF went to execute their search warrant, and the local sheriff in audio tapes after the incident said that he was not apprised of the raid, so he was not told of it, despite being told. Despite being informed that the Davidians knew that a raid was coming, the commander of the ATF decided to go ahead and go through it anyway. Even though the plan depended on reaching the compound without the Branch Davidians being armed and prepared, because they were there to their whole belief system is that they're preparing for the end of the world, where, quote, the armies of Babylon would come in ready for a fight. Well, you have several ATF agents pulling up full kit, ready for a fight.
Yeah,
they're gonna go down.
Feed into that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
And they also lost the element of surprise when a local TV reporter who had been tipped off about the raid asked for directions to the Mount Carmel compound from a U.S. Postal Service mail carrier who just so happened to be David's brother-in-law.
Oh, dude.
So
Yeah.
David was then informed that a raid was coming. So David asked the undercover agent, who he knew was an undercover agent, who was there at the time, asked him to call off the raid because, well, there's women and children.
Yeah.
So because again, he knew that he was undercover, so his cover was blown. So he just made an excuse, just some random excuse, so he could leave the compound and not be present when the raid started. Mm-hmm. And he was later asked after the incident. He said, like, when he left the compound, he said that the Branch Davidians like just started praying as he was leaving. So the survivors who had written about this in like the whole ordeal stated that as the raid was getting ready to start, David had ordered several different male followers to begin like arming themselves and taking up defensive positions, while the women and children were told to take cover in their rooms. And then David would then try to speak to the agents, and whatever would happen next would depend on the agents' like intentions for being there.
Yeah.
So yeah, they arrived at 9:45 in the morning in a convoy of civilian vehicles containing uniformed personnel in SWAT-style tactical gear. So yeah, they came in full kit, everything, the works. Yeah, the whole details on how this first day of the siege gunfight started was, the ATF agents, they claimed that they were shot at first. Well, then the Branch Davidians would claim that they had been shot at first. And one reason that was suggested was that it could have been an accidental discharge of a gun, or possibly by an agent, causing the ATF to return fire.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Other reports say that their first shots were fired by, and I kid you not, the ATF dog team, which was sent in to eliminate the Branch Davidians' dogs in the kennels outside.
Yeah.
So, 3 helicopters from the National Guard were used as aerial distractions, and they took almost all of the incoming fire.
Yeah.
During the first few shots that were being fired, David himself was wounded he was shot in the hand and in the stomach. And within minutes of the raid started, like in the middle of the gunfight as it started, Wayne Martin, who was another friend of David, he called the emergency services, and he was pleading for them to stop shooting. And he asked for a ceasefire. He telling them hey, there's women and children. He has a right to defend himself because they started shooting at the compound first. And he also states that they're shooting, it's not them shooting.
Right.
So 4 ATF agents were killed in the initial shootout on the 28th. The first casualty was an agent. He made it to the west side of the building before he was wounded. They quickly took cover, and then they fired at the buildings while the helicopters began their diversion, and they swept in low over the complex. Again, they fired at the helicopters, but nobody on the helicopters were injured. So on the east side of the compound, agents brought out 2 ladders and set them against the side of the building, and then attempted to climb onto the roof to secure it and reach David's room, where they believed the weapons were being stored. On the west slope of the roof, 3 agents reached David's window and were crouching beside it when they came under fire. 1 agent was killed while another one was wounded. The 3rd agent clambered over the peak of the roof and joined the other agents attempting to enter the armory. Window was smashed, flashbang was thrown in, and 3 agents entered the armory. When another tried to follow them, a hail of bullets penetrated the wall and wounded him, but he was able to reach the ladder and slide to safety. An agent fired his shotgun at Branch Davidians until he was hit in the head by return fire and immediately killed. Inside the armory, the agents killed a Branch Davidian and discovered a cache of weapons, but subsequently came under heavy fire and 2 were wounded. As they escaped, the 3rd agent laid down covering fire, killing another Branch Davidian. As he made his escape, he hit his head on a wooden support beam and then fell off the roof, but he survived.
Oh.
An agent outside providing them with covering fire was shot by a Branch Davidian and was killed instantly. Dozens of other agents took cover, but many Branch Davidian vehicles behind the Branch Davidian vehicles and exchanged fire with the Davidians. The number of the agents that were wounded was increasing, and an agent was killed by gunfire from the compound as agents were firing at a Branch Davidian perched on top of the water tower. The exchange of fire continued, but 45 minutes into the raid, the gunfire began to slow down as agents began to run low on ammunition. That's the only reason why this thing was starting to grind to a halt, was because they were running out of miles. But the shooting continued for a total of 2 hours.
2 hours? My God.
The local sheriff he contacted the ATF and he was able to negotiate a ceasefire. 5 Branch Davidians were killed in the raid. Two of the 5 that were killed were mercy killings at the hands of the other Davidians after they were wounded. And they were buried on the grounds of the compound. Yeah, that was the whole. That was the initial siege, like the first day, like the first day of this whole standoff. And it. Yeah.
Okay.
That's crazy.
Yes.
So 50 more to go.
Yeah. So now the FBI is getting involved. The ATF agents, they were able to establish contact with David and others inside the compound after they withdrew. So when the FBI took command soon after as soon as the results of the deaths of federal agents, which they placed the head of the San Antonio field office in charge of the siege. And the FBI hostage rescue team, the same team that was at Ruby Ridge, they, after even for being criticized of their actions at Ruby Ridge, they were stationed at Waco. So, but this time they had telephones to communicate with the negotiators and everything, so they could communicate by phone.
Yeah.
So at first,
and not a phone shotgun.
Yeah. At first, though, the Davidians, they had contact with local news media, and David gave phone interviews to the media, but the FBI cut the communications to the outside world.
Great.
So, because they don't want them to have any public opinion in the media.
Yeah.
So for the next 51 days throughout this entire siege, communication with those inside was by telephone only to the FBI negotiators. Nobody to the outside, just the FBI. The negotiators' log showed that when the tape was reviewed, there was concern that it would gain sympathy for David and his followers. The video showed that there were children still inside the compound, 23 children still inside the compound. And the child care professionals on the outside prepared to take care of those children as well as the ones already released. And as the siege continued, David, he negotiated for more time, and again, allegedly, so he could write religious documents he needed to complete before surrendering. His conversations, which were full of biblical imagery, alienated the negotiators. Because they were treating this situation as a hostage crisis. They were thinking that everybody was being forced to stay inside the building. So, and among the negotiators, they took to just calling David's words, his responses to them, as just Bible babble. They weren't having it. So, as the siege wore on, 2 factions began to grow within the FBI. One who thought negotiating and talking this out would be an answer. The other one thinking a more forceful approach was going to be the answer.
Right.
So increasingly aggressive techniques were being used to try to force them out. So sleep deprivation on the inhabitants through all-night broadcasts of recordings of jet planes, rock music, Buddhist chanting, screams of rabbits being slaughtered.
Oh my God.
Oh.
Yeah. So they were it's kind of,
and there were still children in there.
Yeah, and it's also kind of insane because they're using these techniques on a group that's prepared for a fight with the quote armies of Babylon.
Yeah.
That show up to their place, open fire on them, and they're thinking they're already deranged. Well, they're using these sleep deprivation techniques. It's going to make them more deranged.
Yeah.
And just that against the amount of time they've spent locked up.
Yeah,
contained.
more deranged and are already already prepped for a fight.
Yeah.
And that's just it was crazy. Outside the compound, while these tactics were being used, their IFVs, the infantry fighting vehicles, they were carrying like the CS tear gas grenades. Were just patrolling around like the perimeter of the building. They were used to destroy the perimeter fence around the buildings, and as well as crush the cars that belonged to the Davidians.
Rude.
And also, they were repeatedly driving over the graves of the previously buried Davidians that had died in the initial siege or the raid by the ATF.
Extra rude.
Despite protests from the Davidians to the negotiators to stop doing that.
Yeah.
2 of the 3 water storage tanks on the roof of the main building had been damaged in the initial raid.
Oh, no.
And the FBI then later cut all power and water off to the building.
Oh.
Leaving them to survive on rainwater and as well as stocked military MRE rations. So the tactics of the sleep and peace disturbance sounds tactic was heavily criticized by the Davidians, or using them against the Davidians. It was criticized by the Schneider's attorney.
Yeah.
Quote, "The point was this: they were trying to have sleep disturbance, and they were trying to take someone that they viewed as unstable to start with, and were trying to drive him crazy.
Yeah.
And they got mad because he did something that they think is irrational."
Yeah. So.
I want you to be crazy. Oh, you did something crazy.
Yeah. Despite these tactics, David ordered a group of his followers to leave. So 11 people left, and they were arrested as material witnesses, with 1 person charged with conspiracy to murder. So the children's willingness to stay with Koresh disturbed the negotiators, and they were unprepared to work around the Branch Davidians' religious zeal. So as the siege went on, the children were aware that an earlier group of children who had left with some of the women were immediately separated, and the women were arrested.
Yeah.
So during the siege, there were several biblical scholars who study apocalypticism in the religious groups that attempted to persuade the FBI that siege tactics being used by the government agents would only reinforce the impression that the Davidians were part of the biblical end times confrontation that had cosmic significance. And this would likely increase the chances of a violent and deadly outcome from the Davidians.
Yeah.
The scholars pointed out that the beliefs of the group, yes, they appeared to be extreme, but to the Davidians, their beliefs were deeply meaningful, and they would be willing to die for those beliefs. So David's discussions with the negotiators became increasingly difficult. He then proclaimed he was the second coming of Christ and had been commanded by his Father in heaven to remain in the compound. From April 5th to the 13th, David refused to speak to the FBI, citing the observance of Passover. FBI planners, growing increasingly impatient, considered using snipers to just kill David outright and possibly other key members of the Davidians. But they also voiced concern that the Branch Davidians might commit mass suicide, citing what happened in Jonestown with Jim Jones's cult, which is another topic I think I would like to talk about sometimes. But
Okay.
anyway,
You're just going to be our occultist, like our cult expert, I guess.
Koresh and other Davidians, they vehemently denied any plans for a mass suicide when confronted by negotiators on this point. Because the other Davidians that had left the compound and were arrested, they also were asked, and they also had denied that there was any preparation for any sort of mass suicide.
That's interesting. That's usually the go-to.
Yeah.
Yeah. On April 14th, David released a letter to his lawyer that would prove to be his last communication to the outside world. In it, he claimed that he would be writing down his interpretation of the 7 seals of the book of Revelation from the Bible, promising an exit to the compound as soon as it was released. And here's what he says. "I want the people of this generation to be saved. I am working day and night to complete my final work of writing out these seals. I thank my Father. He has finally granted me the chance to do this. It will bring new light and hope to many, and they will not have to deal with me, the person. I will demand the first manuscript of the seals be given to you. Many scholars and religious leaders will wish to have copies for examination. I will keep a copy with me. As soon as I can see that people like Jim Tabor and Phil Arnold have a copy, I will come out, and you can do your thing with this beast. The letter immediately sparked disagreement within the FBI. Some saw it as a breakthrough. Others ridiculed it, suspecting it to be just a delay tactic designed by Koresh to buy time to prepare for another violent confrontation.
Yeah.
Yep.
After examining this and then 4 other letters sent by David, they stated that Koresh exhibited all the hallmarks of rampant, morbidly virulent paranoia, concluding that I do not believe there is in any of these writings any better or at least certain hope for an early end to this siege. Newly appointed Attorney General Janet Reno, using the justification of child abuse, received or approved recommendations by the FBI hostage rescue team to mount an assault after being told that conditions were deteriorating and that children were being abused. They used similar tactics to another siege, that one that I have never heard about, the Covenant, the Sword, the Arm of the Lord siege in Arkansas. They used similar tactics, and they were going to use those similar tactics against the Davidians at President Bill Clinton's suggestion. The assault then took place on April 19th, 1993. The Branch Davidians, because they were heavily armed, the FBI HRT, their arms included 50 caliber rifles and armored combat engineering vehicles. The vehicles used explosives to punch holes in the walls of the building so they could pump in the tear gas to try to force them out without harming the Davidians. So the stated plan called for increasing amounts of gas to be pumped in over 2 days of increasing to increase pressure. Officially, no armed assault was to be made. Regarding the initial plan to tear gas the building, the spokesperson of the FBI claimed that input was taken from psychologists, psychiatrists, behavior specialists, as well as scientific medical staff. That's quote. Loudspeakers were used to tell the Davidians that there would be no armed assault and to ask them not to fire on the vehicles. According to the FBI, the hostage rescue team agents had been permitted to return any incoming fire, but no shots were fired on federal agents. When several Davidians opened fire, the hostage rescue team response was to only increase the amount of gas being used. The hostage team delivered 40 millimeter CS gas rounds using M79 grenade launchers. Very early in the morning, the team fired 2 of the CS gas rounds at the Branch Davidian construction site. Around mid-morning, the team began to run low on the 40 millimeter CS rounds. The tear gas rounds procured from the Company F in Waco turned out to be unusable pyrotechnics and were returned to the office afterwards, which some people kind of what do I want to say, dispute that claim that pyrotechnics weren't used, because then later on, as this is going on, a fire would break out, and then people also dispute like the claims of how the fire started, and a lot of people also say like pyrotechnics were used by the ATF, even though they say that there weren't. It would later come out that they were using pyrotechnics and that they had lied about saying that they didn't use them.
Oh, wow.
So, after more than 6 hours, no Davidians had left the building. They sheltered instead in an underground concrete block room, which was called the bunker, within the building, or they just started using gas masks. At around noon, 3 fires broke out almost simultaneously in different parts of the building and spread quickly. Footage of the fire was broadcast live by television crews. The government maintains that the fires were deliberately set by the Davidians, and then some Davidian survivors and other experts maintain that the fires were accidentally or deliberately started by the assault, possibly by types of the pyrotechnic rounds that they were used by the FBI. Only 9 people left the building during the fire. The remaining Davidians, including the children, were either buried alive by the rubble, suffocated, or shot in an act of mercy.
Jesus.
Wow.
Many were killed by smoke or carbon monoxide inhalation and other causes as the fire engulfed the building. Because as the fires were raging through the building and the CS gas also full in the building was full of the gas. That gas is flammable, and as that gas burns, it is like carbon monoxide. It releases the carbon monoxide, so that's where the carbon monoxide inhalation comes from, is from the gas burning.
Wow.
According to the FBI, Steve Schneider, who was David's top aide, shot and killed David, and then he killed himself. A total of 76 people died, and a large concentration of bodies, weapons, and ammunition was found in the bunker's storage room. The Texas Rangers arson investigator report assumes that many of the occupants were either denied escape from within or refused to leave until escape was no longer an option. It is also mentioned that the structural debris from the breaching operations on the west end of the building could have blocked a possible escape route through the tunnel system. Autopsies of the dead revealed that some women and children found beneath the fallen concrete wall of the storage room died of skull injuries. So saying that some of them died during the collapse.
Yeah, like on impact, basically. Wow.
The DOJ reports indicated that only one body had traces of benzene, which was one of the components of the solvent dispersed gas, but that the gas insertions had finished nearly 1 hour before the fire started, and that it was enough time for the solvent to dissipate from the bodies of the Branch Davidians that had inhaled the tear gas. Autopsy records also indicate that at least 20 Branch Davidians were shot, including David, as well as 5 children under the age of 14. One of the children is also reported to have been stabbed. The medical examiner who performed the autopsies believed that these deaths were mercy killings by the Davidians trapped in the fire with no escape. The expert retained that the Office of Special Counsel concluded that many of the gunshot wounds support self-destruction either by overt suicide, consensual execution, which is suicide by proxy, or likely forced execution. So, and afterward, as the fire was still raging around the compound, the Branch Davidians, they had their own flag flying on a flagpole, and as the fire was raging, their flag was ripped from the pole, like by the wind. And later, as the siege was coming to an end, the ATF agents, they raised their own flag, an FBI flag, and the Texas flag. So people saw it as like a conquest.
Yeah.
There's like a sign of
conquest. I feel like
conquest.
that's not necessarily like necessary.
Yeah,
like,
it's
yay,
kind
we
of
caused a lot of death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We got the one guy, but like at what cost? You know?
Yeah.
Yep. So none of the buildings that were there remain there today. The only thing that's left there are the concrete foundations. Because the entire site was bulldozed 2 weeks after the siege.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Oh, that's
I mean,
fast.
I guess. Yeah.
I kind of hope they recovered the bodies first, but I don't know.
I know.
The only thing that resides there is a small chapel that was built years after the siege, and that's the only thing that's standing on
land.
site.
Yeah.
I wonder if they left the bodies that were buried there, or if they exhumed them.
That is that's really crazy. Like
That was a wild ride.
that was a wild ride. Yeah. I don't even know. Like, I feel like I'm just sitting here like, yeah, but it's like I'm just processing it all.
I know, because I feel like I need like a board at some point of like, oh no, don't do that. No.
Yeah.
That happened.
So I do think the reason why this sounds so familiar, maybe you remember, I do think there's an episode of Criminal Minds I think it's Criminal Minds, that has like it's not like the same, but they do like kind of, there's a lot of similarities to it. They have like a, anyways, there's a similar episode. There's some similarities. I think they tried to do some sort of like tribute to something. The event.
I told you guys wrong. I had the flags mixed up. It was just it was an American flag, the Texas flag, and the ATF flag. It wasn't yeah.
Of course, it was the ATF flag.
Yeah. That's the one that they replaced the Branch Davidians flag with.
I feel like that's just so unnecessary. I want to just take it down later. That's like.
It's kind of, it feels very war-esque.
Yeah, it felt very like to show like media, like, ha, like we did it.
And it's like, yeah, you killed like, what was it, 80 people? Well, I'm sure
70,
more.
I think it was 70.
Give or take. There was a 78 in there, but I don't know if it was before or after some died.
I get it's like a tough situation to like, cause
76.
76.
It's a tough situation to kind of unravel because like, yes, they did have like weapons and guns, but I think if they didn't just go in guns blazing right off the bat, you know.
Yeah, I don't know why they thought that was okay with everybody there, like.
Because like if they did have a guy on the inside, then they'd know that their whole thing is like people are gonna come and wage a war.
Yeah. And
they need to do that. And then they go, okay, let's go wage a war on them. And you think they're gonna be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, they're gonna.
They were prepared for it. They're not gonna be like scared by this.
Right.
This event in a sense. They're like, we got this, guys.
So there's a couple of controversies that have come about from this siege, saying how like one of them was like who shot first? Was it the ATF shooting on the Davidians first, or was it the Davidians shooting at ATF first? One of the ATF agents assigned to the door team, who was assigned to assault through the front door, he told the Rangers and the Waco police that he thought the first shots came from the dog team assigned to neutralize the Davidians' dogs. Yeah. But then later at the trial, he insisted that the Davidians had shot first.
Probably because it was after everything went down and they realized they kind of... Yeah. Everything kind of just became a flaming bag of shit. And they were like, oh, no, the Davidians shot first. It wasn't...
Yeah, it was totally their fault because they're the ones that all died.
Dogs. What is up with these people and killing dogs?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose in theory, right, they could have them trained to be some sort of attack dogs or something. So
it's just sad.
Yeah,
get some tranquilizers, you know.
Yeah, like
the Davidians. They also claim that the door team opened fire like at the door, and then they returned fire in self-defense. And there is an article in the Austin Chronicle that notes that long before the fire, the Davidians were discussing the evidence contained in the doors during the siege. In a phone conversation with the FBI, Steve Snyder, who was one of Koresh's main confidants, told the agents that the evidence from the front door will clearly show how many bullets and what happened. A Houston attorney who went inside Mount Carmel during the siege testified at the trial that protruding metal on the inside of the right-hand entry door made it clear that the bullet holes were coming by incoming rounds from the outside.
Yep. Right. That's what I was kind of wondering with them, like demolishing the building so quick.
Well, we'll say here's more on this. He also testified that only the right-hand entry door had bullet holes, whereas the left-hand door was completely intact. Nothing happened with the left door. So the government presented the left-hand entry door at the trial, claiming that the right-hand entry door had been lost. It just disappeared.
Sure, convenient.
The left-hand door contained numerous bullet holes made by both outgoing and incoming rounds.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So they used that. They couldn't determine who shot first because the right door was gone.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not saying like they're bad guy. Like David definitely shouldn't have been doing. That stuff he shouldn't have been doing. But that doesn't mean like all.
Oh, like he's not a good person.
No, he's not at all. But like that doesn't mean the rest of his like group deserved what they got.
Exactly.
Because they weren't exactly like they're complicit, but not all of them were exactly like, you know.
Again, you go to that cult lifestyle and situation where you get groomed and you know, you live in a world where that's what you think is right and whatnot. I don't know. Wow. That is just, I mean, I don't know. It's a hard situation, right? There's, again, a reason why I will not have that job is because there's too many gray areas. There's not always a black and white, like, this is what you should do. This is the right answer. Because most of the time you're going to choose something and it's going to be kind of right, but mostly wrong, or vice versa, whichever. But, yeah. Wow.
And I do have to mention, I have to find my note again. But you remember the sniper in the Ruby Ridge standoff, Lon Horiuchi?
Yes.
He was also present at Waco.
My guy.
He's probably the one going to do it. Shoot.
Yeah,
He's probably like, yo, let's go for it.
I got away with it last time.
He probably made the first shot.
I got away with it last time. Might as well.
Yeah. So I forgot, like, I closed his section of notes, so I had to go back and find him again. There was another sniper who was deployed with Horiuchi during the Waco siege, and he claimed that he could hear Horiuchi shooting from a sniper position, and he then later retracted his statement, saying that he had been misquoted, and he only heard snipers at the sniper position, and announced that the shots had been fired by the Davidians, not by Horiuchi.
It was him. It was him. My conspiracy. I don't know if it's a conspiracy, if it's right.
3 of the 12 expended .308 caliber casings that the Texas Rangers reported finding in the house were at Horiuchi's position. However, officials maintain that they were left behind from earlier use of the house by the ATF snipers in February on the day of their raid. The recovered casings at the house were tested and identified by the Rangers and the Office of Special Counsel, matching them to weapons used by the ATF and not by the FBI. So they weren't fired by Horiuchi, they were fired by the ATF agents that raided the compound in February. So for the 5 months following the Waco fire, Timothy McVeigh, the OKC bomber, he worked at gun shows, handing out free cards printed with Horiuchi's name and address, quote, in hopes that somebody in the Patriot movement would assassinate the sharpshooter.
Oh, shit.
He wrote hate mail to the sniper, suggesting that, quote, what goes around comes around. And McVeigh also considered targeting Horiuchi or a member of his family before settling on the Oklahoma City bombing. Yeah, and the legacy of Waco, like I said when talking about Ruby Ridge, was another one of the incidents that Timothy McVeigh and his accomplice cited in the event of the Oklahoma City bombing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Within days after the bombing, McVeigh and Terry Nichols were taken into custody for their roles in the bombing. And they determined that they were both sympathizers of anti-government militia movements, and that their motive was to avenge the government's handling of Ruby Ridge and the Waco incidents. McVeigh testified that he chose the date of April 19th because it was the second anniversary of the Mount Carmel fire. And in March, he drove from Arizona to Waco to observe the standoff for himself. Along with other protesters, he was photographed by the FBI, and McVeigh himself was briefly interviewed by a reporter. So, a courtroom reporter also claims to have later seen McVeigh outside the courthouse at Waco selling anti-government bumper stickers.
Solid.
Other events that share the date of the fire at Mount Carmel have been mentioned in the discussions of the siege. April 20th, 1999, the date of the Columbine High School shooting, might have been timed to mark either the anniversary of the assault on Waco or Adolf Hitler's birthday.
Oh.
Some connections appear to be just coincidental. 8 years before the Waco fire, the ATF and FBI raided another compound of a religious cult, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, which used the similar tactics that were suggested by Bill Clinton during that raid, which was the tear gas. Mm-hmm. Which I actually didn't know about being a siege with that group. There were also other sieges that came about. There's one, it's the Montana Freeman siege. It came into public attention in 96 when they engaged in a prolonged armed standoff with agents of the FBI. So like the events of Waco and Ruby Ridge were still pretty fresh in the public. So the FBI was extremely cautious and wanted to prevent a reoccurrence of those events.
The dumpster fire that was created.
Yeah.
After 81 days of negotiations, the Freemen surrendered to the authorities on June 14th, 1996 without loss of life. And that is my brief on the Waco siege.
Wow. No, crazy. I mean, it was crazy from the beginning. It was crazy in the middle. It was crazy in the end.
That was a lot.
Like,
to unpack.
The aftermath was also crazy. No, that was, wow. No, like I said, I've kind of heard, and like that's something a lot of people mention, but I wonder how many people don't really know the whole story, or at least most of the story. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of people do. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people do, but you know what I'm saying. But yeah. Yeah.
Speechless from all the craziness that went on, honestly.
See, that's why I didn't want you guys researching these and just wanted to leave it to me, because I wanted you to guys have a fresh perspective on
everything.
Both of these events.
Yeah, because I don't think I've ever heard, like, it like sounded familiar, because maybe like, because I watch like Criminal Minds, and like I do a lot of like I watch true crime, so like it'd be probably like reference, because like, oh yeah, Waco, yeah.
And then, to be fair, they all kind of blend together sometimes when you've watched so many and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Wendigoon, he made videos talking about the Ruby Ridge and the Waco sieges, and I highly recommend watching those. Yeah, because he goes into like way more detail than I do. I just wanted to give a brief. Yeah. Like a brief just overview.
I think it was a good brief.
No, it was pretty. It felt like I get it.
Yeah, he goes into a lot more of a lot more of the context and events leading up to these sieges and events. I actually watched both of them in preparation, like for these, because I know there's some points that he lists that I couldn't quite find when I did my own research, so I cited some of those, so I have to give him credit for all that, because he does a really good job.
That's the crazy thing, that like I give props to everybody who does do like true crime podcast or content and stuff like that. It's like finding all of the facts and figuring out
details,
figuring out what is right and what is not. And I mean, I work at a history center, and part of my job is finding like history things. So it's like I do the same thing, just not necessarily true crime, but it's like going back and trying to read articles, read events, see this, like, okay, well, this says this is the location, but this says this is the location. But if you look back in, historic documents, this doesn't make sense for that to be, and whatnot. So it's a lot.
That's the kind of trouble I ran into when I was doing the true crime one we did. It was like, this is differently, this is differently. So I was like, I'm just going to say this and hope it's right. And if it's wrong, apologies.
Yeah. And so, you know.
And that's something I was thinking of as I was just reading through those. I was like, man, I hope I have like the right information. I hope I'm giving out the right information.
It all seemed legit to me, but what do I know?
Yeah.
But,
so yeah, that was... Yeah.
Thanks, guys, especially Christian. Thank you for doing all that research and doing it. Like I said, he was just like, you guys sit back and relax. That's why we had some hot cocoa earlier,
Yeah. Any other topics that I would like to discuss? Like, you could just leave that to like me discussing the topics, because I want you guys to have like fresh perspectives on.
Go ahead, you pick your next topic, start doing the research. You just tell me what date you want to record, and we'll make it happen. We'll do another podcast with Christian.
Like I said, the Jonestown. The Jim Jones, the cult, because that's where the phrase like "drink the Kool-Aid" comes from.
Oh yeah. I've done that one before. Yes, I've did the research on that one before.
I did it weird though.
Yep, I remember a story my grandmother telling me about when she heard about what happened. Like, she was like, it freaked her out when she heard about what happened.
Yeah.
So that'd be another cool one I'd like to talk about.
Yeah. So. Anyways. Yeah. Anyway, I just had such a good time.
Yeah. That was good.
Thank you guys for coming. I super appreciate it. Thanks for watching, of course. yeah, we'll be back next time with something else. I don't know. Who knows what it's gonna be? So, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
And cut.
And